Warm welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Financial Inclusion for Persons with Disabilities. This webinar will be in conjunction with the publication of AFI's special report on this topic, which will go live at the end of this webinar, so do stay tuned. My name is Vidya Raman. I'm the Policy Specialist at AFI, and I'll be supporting today's webinar. Very happy to see that there's a strong interest in this topic, and we're very much looking forward to a lively discussion throughout this session. Just want to run through a couple of housekeeping rules before we start. So kindly mute yourselves, unless, of course, you'd like to contribute or ask any questions, which you can do via the interactive chat, the raise hand feature, or the question and answer function. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Iliki Bolitawa, who is the Director of the Policy, Programs and Implementation team at AFI, to provide some welcoming remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vidya. Can you hear me?
Yes, good.
Okay, wonderful, great. Dear AFI members, distinguished guests, and friends from around the world, we warmly welcome you all to AFI's highly anticipated webinar on financial inclusion for persons with disabilities. We are delighted that you are joining us today as we embark on an important journey to support and advance financial inclusion for persons with disabilities, which continues to be a prominent policy priority globally. You may be wondering why financial inclusion for persons with disabilities is a subject that deserves our attention. As we are all aware, financial inclusion is not just about bank accounts and loans. It's about empowerment, independence, and dignity. Our hope is that today we will foster ways to support persons with disabilities in a dignified way together. In recognition of these, AFI members unanimously adopted in 2019 at the Global Policy Forum in Rwanda the Kigali Statement, committing to put disadvantaged groups, including persons with disabilities, as well as women, youth, forcibly displaced persons, and older people at the heart of our financial inclusion strategies and policies. This event is particularly significant as it takes place in conjunction with the publication of AFI's special report, Financial Inclusion for Persons with Disabilities, Insights from AFI Members' Strategies and Policies, where insights on global context with specific examples, barriers to accessing the formal financial system, as well as key learnings and recommendations in the design and implementation of effective policies for financial inclusion for persons with disabilities will be discussed in detail. Today's event also closely coincides with the United Nations International Day of Persons with Disabilities, which falls on December 3rd. In celebration of this day, we would like to invite you to mark this in your calendar and explore ways to promote their rights and ignite meaningful change. Ladies and gentlemen, in this webinar, we will hear from a panel of passionate policymakers and individuals who not only believe in this cause, but have first-hand experience in helping to financially include and support persons with disabilities. I would particularly like to thank our esteemed panelists who will be sharing their experiences today. Mr. Clarence Blay, Bank of Ghana and former chair of AFI's Global Standards Proportionality Working Group, Mr. Evans Mutai, Deputy Director, Currency Operations Department of the Central Bank of Kenya, Ms. Nazrin Sohaib, the Senior Joint Director, Consumer Protection Department of State Bank of Pakistan, and Ms. Nomsebo Hadebe, CEO, Center for Financial Inclusion, Kingdom of Eswatini. Today's discussion will delve into the diverse range of disabilities that exist in our society. We will explore mental health conditions, vision impairment, physical disabilities, as well as disabilities that emerge later in life or evolve over time. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that exist for us policymakers to consider? And how can we continue to support and financially include persons with disabilities in a meaningful way? As we listen to the insights shared by our esteemed panel of experts, we would like to take this opportunity to urge all of you, our fellow members, to reflect upon the various issues that will be discussed. Additionally, we invite you to contribute any additional matters that we should consider. Furthermore, we encourage you to share any specific initiatives that are currently being implemented in your respective jurisdictions to ensure the financial inclusion of individuals with disabilities. Let us engage in a meaningful discussion on this important topic. I have no doubt that by the end of this discussion, we will leave with a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities ahead. I would like to draw your attention to one final important point. In order to maintain a seamless flow of knowledge on this subject, AFI is pleased to inform you that we will be organizing peer discussions for our esteemed members. These discussions will provide a platform for sharing best practices in implementing policies for persons with disabilities following the conclusion of this webinar. So please feel free and reach out to any of us that are online from the AFI Management Unit. Furthermore, we also encourage you to actively participate in the Q&A session that will follow with our expert panel discussion. Your questions and insights are invaluable, and they will help us collectively drive progress in this realm. Before we begin our expert conversation, let us pause to reflect on the path ahead. We all have the potential to make a significant difference in the lives of millions of people who deserve equal access to financial services, same opportunities, and equal dignity. It is a responsibility we eagerly accept, knowing that each step forward puts us closer to a world where financial inclusion actually means inclusion for all. I'd want to thank everyone for joining us today, as well as our distinguished panelists for participating in this webinar. While the road ahead may be difficult, let us start this trip together by sharing our ideas for tangible solutions to promote financial inclusion for people with disabilities. Without further ado, let us kick off this exciting webinar session, and I look forward to an engaging and enlightening discussion. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Iliki, for your inspiring words. Now we would like to play a short video which showcases the initiatives by the Central Bank of Egypt on the important steps they have taken to boost banking for persons with disabilities. We hope you enjoy this video.
Meet Ola. Until recently, she had no way of accessing banking services without the help of a friend or relative. Ola forms part of 15% of the world population living with disabilities. For many of them, access to basic needs like education, transport and banking services remains a daily challenge. Luckily in Egypt, where Ola lives, things are changing.
فكرة إن أنا أدخل بنك وفرع بدون أي مساعدة من دخولي للباب في رمز لده مفيش حد بيفرض مساعدته إلا لو أنا طلبته. طبعا ال ATM نفسها حاجة حسستني بخصوصية لأول مرة أتعامل من غير بدون مساعدة. خصوصية فوق الخيال، خصوصية فعلا أنا كنت بحلم بيها.
Since 2021, the Central Bank of Egypt has been working with banks to expand access to financial services for people living with disabilities.
It is crucial for the Central Bank of Egypt to economically empower the most vulnerable segments. Disabled people are of a significant importance that is certainly underserved and requires more intervention on the policy level to facilitate and ease their access to financial services and provide them with fair, quality, and affordable products based on a customer-centric approach.
Egyptian banks are directed by the central bank to upgrade their infrastructure and services to accommodate disabled customers. This includes providing wheelchair-friendly access, height-adjusted ATMs with built-in voice instruction, bank documentation in Braille, and staff trained in sign language.
المنشورات اللي بطريقة برايل سهلت لي ان انا اقدر اطلع على الشروط والاحكام بدون مساعدة حد. كمان الاي تي ام هي بتبقى صوتية، بقدر احط الفلوس بتاعتي او اعمل ايداع واسحب براحتي.
Many Egyptian banks also offer preferential interest rates to people living with disabilities and have started accepting stamps and fingerprinting as alternatives to signature identification and authorization.
By the end of the year 2022, we had equipped 15.2% of existing branches, 19.3% of the ATMs, and finally, trained 70% of the targeted branches staff.
Egypt has proved that banking can be one less thing to worry about for Ola, Ahmed, and the many millions of people living with disabilities.
We hope you enjoyed the video, and we would like to express our thanks to the Central Bank of Egypt for sharing these very important initiatives with us. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Robin Newnham, who is the head of the Policy Analysis and Guidance team at AFI. Mr. Robin will be sharing a short presentation on the key aspects of AFI's special report on financial inclusion for persons with disabilities, insights from AFI member strategies and policies. Over to you, Robin.
Well, thank you very much, Vidya, and I'd like to add my warm welcome to all the AFI members who've joined us for today's webinar. It's really heartening indeed to see the level of interest in this important topic, and it certainly does reassure us that the development of this special report is both timely and relevant to our members' goals. So my task now is just to take us through some of the key elements of the AFI special report, which, as Vidya has said, will be released immediately after this webinar for you to read and digest in your own time. So firstly, a little bit of context on the background to the report. And as my colleague, Dr. Eliki Beletowa, set out in his opening remarks, this effort really originated with a commitment that AFI members themselves made in adopting the Kigali Statement in 2019, committing to place disadvantaged groups at the center of our financial inclusion strategies and policies. And the purpose of this special report has therefore been to review progress in achieving that goal and to aid peer learning as well by highlighting specific national strategies, policies, and initiatives from our diverse member institutions who are all promoting financial inclusion for persons with disabilities. And I'll refer henceforth during this presentation to PWDs using the shorthand. So we very much hope that by publishing this report, other financial regulatory authorities, both in the network and beyond, will be motivated and inspired to develop their own policies in this common direction. So a few words now on the structure of the report. It covers, first of all, a literature review on the topic of the financial inclusion of PWDs, highlights main definitions, background on some of the global context, and also an analysis of the barriers to accessing the formal financial system that PWDs face. We also touch on the exacerbating impact of COVID-19 on PWDs. This is then followed by a synthesis of country strategies, policies, and initiatives. And finally, the report features 2 in-depth case studies, and we're really appreciative to the CMBV Mexico and to Bangladesh Bank, who provided key informant interviews and much additional information to support those case studies. Finally, the report does recommend some policy considerations based on the lessons learned from these country implementation experiences that have the potential to contribute to financial inclusion for PWDs. Going to the next slide, I'd like to outline some of the context on to this webinar that more than 1 billion people are affected by some form of disability. That's around 15% of the global population. It's important to keep in mind that this is a very heterogeneous grouping and the disabilities are a very broad spectrum. So we need to consider mobility impairment, vision or hearing impairment, mental disability. The challenges and barriers will vary very significantly between those groups, and the solutions need to be tailored appropriately as well. There is no one size fits all when we're looking at PWDs. Rather, we need to embrace a culture of continuous learning, engagement, and response to work together towards solutions. At the global level, the positive news is that extensive and powerful country commitment frameworks do exist. We have more than 170 countries that have ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development also includes several quantifiable targets relating explicitly to this target group. But the challenges to achieving these goals remain very substantial. And as you can see in the bottom bullet point, there are significant macroeconomic consequences to the continuing exclusion of PWDs from the economy. This is estimated by the World Bank at a cost of 5 to 7% of global GDP. Turning to the next slide, as the report highlights, one of the reasons that advancing the inclusion of PWDs in society has proven so challenging is the vicious circle of poverty and disability, which reinforce each other in a recurring cause and effect relationship, as you can see in the diagram here on the slide. So disability can be a contributor to poverty, as it hinders access to adequate education, decent work opportunities. But on the flip side, disabilities can also be considered as a consequence of poverty, given that people on low incomes are much more vulnerable to developing disabilities in the first place, which can be due to malnutrition, lack of adequate sanitary conditions, and other factors that make them more vulnerable. There's also a very important gender inclusion element to consider here, in that women with disabilities suffer from double discrimination, and they're 3 times more likely to experience physical and sexual abuse than women without disabilities. Going to the next slide, we go through in the next section of the report, an analysis of the particular barriers that PWDs face. So whilst access to the financial system can potentially provide some of the tools to tackle PWD exclusion, in practice, there are a number of hurdles that do exist to their accessing services that meet their needs. This can include social stigma, discriminatory attitudes, and prejudice. It can also include lack of adequate training by the staff of financial services providers. There's also an important element of digital exclusion. According to the GSMA, 90% of PWDs are estimated not to have adequate access to the assistive technologies that they require. And again, women PWDs are particularly disadvantaged, having less access to cell phones and more limited use of mobile internet. Lack of enabling regulatory frameworks can also be a compounding barrier. For example, by failing to appropriately incentivize provision of services for PWDs. And regulations are also needed to ensure that recourse is available in cases of discrimination against PWDs. Another major challenge, as with many of the other categories of disadvantaged groups, is lack of adequate data. And particularly, we're talking here about data disaggregated by sex, age, and type of disability. This is one of the main obstacles in identifying the needs of PWDs, as well as to developing and monitoring effective policies and programs targeted towards this population segment. So for these reasons, levels of financial exclusion do tend to be much higher for PWDs than for the general population. And that, of course, exacerbates the economic and social exclusion that they're already facing. Turning to the impact of COVID-19, which we also detail in the special report, we can see that PWDs were disproportionately impacted by health, social, and economic impacts, and also sometimes not fully included in the policy responses to COVID-19. So firstly, looking at health impacts, PWDs may have been more vulnerable to the virus due to pre-existing health conditions or not having accessible information on how to avoid contact with the virus. When it comes to economic and social impacts, because they are disproportionately represented in informal employment, they face more difficulties in accessing social protection schemes or accessing affordable loans to keep their businesses going. And when it comes to responses to the pandemic, often due to their increased fragility, plus the lack of data or effective coordination by authorities with PWDs and their representative groups. That often meant that their specific needs were not taken account of, and they face increased poverty and marginalization as a result. But going on to the next slide, we also detail in the report a much more positive side of this topic when we start to look at the global outlook, and in particular the actions that the financial regulatory community and AFI members are starting to take to recognize PWD's need. And we're starting to see a real step change in momentum here within the last few years when it comes to recognition of the challenges and also implementation of targeted policies that meet PWD's needs. And the special report does provide plentiful country examples, positive initiatives that are starting to slowly shift the needle in the right direction. By way of example, the Central Bank of Jordan has issued the instructions for financial consumer protection for customers with disabilities. And this consists of a set of articles aimed at removing all physical and behavioral barriers hindering PWD access. So that includes measures such as ramps in bank branches, modified ATMs for use by clients with various disabilities, as well as making sure that all kinds of information on various banking services is available in formats that PWDs can readily access. The report also provides some examples from beyond the network, such as a case study from Banca d'Italia on the central bank's financial education initiatives for PWDs. The Banca d'Italia has produced a very comprehensive banking and financial services guide that explains to consumers some of the most common banking and financial products available to them. And the central bank has developed audio version of these materials for the blind and visually impaired, and also produced videos in sign language for the benefit of the hearing impaired. In addition, the Banca d'Italia has organized a number of events to teach the blind and visually impaired to recognize banknotes. Turning to the next slide, as you can see, there's also a wealth of other examples of varied initiatives targeted towards PWDs. These include Peru and Dominican Republic from Latin America. We have Uganda, Kenya, Malawi, and Sierra Leone from Africa, Palestine from the Arab region, and Pakistan, China, and India from Asia, as well as Russia. Finally, we have two in-depth case studies, as I mentioned earlier, from Mexico and Bangladesh, and there's a lot of rich material there that details the story of how these member institutions have effectively overcome some of the barriers facing PWDs. Coming now to the final slide and touching on the report's early conclusions on how we really advance effective inclusion of PWDs in our society. So the report really highlights three principal areas that we can consider for policy focus going forwards. First amongst these, adaptive financial technologies. These are really a key tool for accessing financial institutions and for allowing PWDs more independence in their lives and full participation in financial services. In this context, tailoring the design of digital products and services for PWDs is a very critical aspect, but it's also important to look at skills building as benefits. So consultation and participatory processes with the community is very important to understand that. The second major recommendation from the report is really to integrate PWDs within national financial inclusion strategies, financial education strategies, and other plans and initiatives. So it's important that they should be prioritized as a target demographic with defined goals and responsible units to ensure the implementation of relevant actions. Thirdly, the difficulty of accessing data on the current financial status, needs, and behaviors of PWDs is one of the main challenges we identify. So it's recommended that financial regulators coordinate with their national statistics authorities and also other stakeholders such as NGOs who may be well placed to address some of those gaps. Ideally, we'd like to see data disaggregated by sex, age, and by type of disability that can really facilitate effective decision-making, the effective design of tailored products and services, and also the monitoring and evaluation of relevant targeted initiatives. So the report does conclude, therefore, with optimism that the policy levers to materially improve the financial inclusion of PWDs do exist. And it concludes as well with a call to action for regulatory bodies to really place this group at the center of their strategies in order that we can leave no one behind and achieve a more inclusive society for all. So with that brief overview of the report, I hope I've just managed to whet your appetite a little bit to learn more, both from our experts in the ensuing panel discussion in this webinar, but also to read and digest some of the case studies and additional resources that you'll find in the report itself accessible to you after we close today. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll pass you back to our MC Vidya to take us forward in this webinar. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robin, for that insightful presentation. I think we're all very excited to see the report after the end of this webinar. So next, we have our final and main event for today, which is the panel discussion on this topic. Moderating this session would be Ms. Sulita Levo, who is the policy manager at AFI. Thank you so much, Sulita. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Vidya. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, that's great. So thanks again very much for the panel discussion introduction. Thank you, Liki, for the opening remarks, and Robin for the introduction of this very interesting report. So I'm Sulita Levo, policy manager at AFI, and I'm working closely with members from the Consumer Empowerment and Market Conduct working group. So I think here everything touching on consumer protection, empowerment, education was mentioned in the presentation just before, and I'm really excited to personally learn more about this very important topic. So first of all, let me welcome our esteemed speakers. Just to confirm, Vidya, we do have apologize from Namsebo for the time being. Is this still correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, that's totally fine. So I'm very pleased to welcome Clarence Blay, Assistant Director at the Bank of Ghana, and who's responsible for fintech promotion and innovation, and who brings with him 2 decades of experience in various areas of central banking. Clarence was previously chairman in AFI's Global Standards Proportionality Working Group and is currently the chair of the working group subgroup on financial inclusion country assessment. Then we'd like to invite Evans Mutai, who's responsible for the general operations and administration of the Currency Operations Department at the Central Bank of Kenya. Evans was instrumental in the development of new generation currency banknotes and coins issued in accordance with the Constitution of Kenya, which also took into consideration its users, including persons with disabilities. And finally, I'd like to warmly welcome Nasrin Sohaib, who's currently working at, as divisional head at the Banking Conduct Policy Department of the State Bank of Pakistan. Nasrin has many years of experience supervising policy matters and initiatives related to consumer protection and banking conduct. A very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. I think before we start, I'd like to quickly check Clarence, Evans, and Nasrin, whether your video and audio work smoothly. Hello and welcome again.
Hello. Can you please hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you.
Really good to have you on board. And a warm hello to all the participants as well. I see a few colleagues from the SAMEC working group. Warm hello from Kuala Lumpur, and welcome everyone for this discussion. So I think we've heard quite very interesting high-level insight and introduction remarks from the opening and the presentation just now. And maybe I suggest that we start quite globally for the introduction of this panel discussion. And I'd like to invite each of you to provide maybe a 2 to 3 minutes overview of the current state of financial inclusion of persons with disabilities in your respective countries and jurisdictions. So if this is fine with you, maybe we can start with Evans for a quick introduction on the topic.
Thank you so much, Sulita. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure to engage and interact with a team of people who are like-minded towards resolving some of the challenges we have globally, particularly on financial inclusion and the general banking practices globally. So I'll quickly also take you through an overview about the state of financial inclusion in Kenya. Just like it was pointed out by Robin and Liki, not much data really comes up easily, particularly with regard to specific aggregation and disaggregation of PWDs. The same case applies to Kenya. But we were lucky enough that in 2019, we had a general Kenya population and household census, which was much more detailed than the previous ones. In fact, from that population census, we came up with a number of 47.6 million Kenyans then. And very specifically, they came up with an aggregate of 2.2% of the people, of the population in Kenya, being persons with disability. In fact, they were even able to break that down further and determine that 2.5% of those and of their population rather were female with disabilities, and 1.9% with being males with disability. I think we were even lucky enough to go further deep down into the analysis and discover that 2.6% of this population were really well within the rural areas, while only 1.4% was in the urban areas. And they were also able to go down deeper and discover that persons with disability, almost 0.9% accounted for people with mobility challenges, 0.8% people with vision impairments, hearing 0.4%, 0.5% with cognitive skills, and that would cover also the mental cases, 0.3% self-care, while only 0.3% with regard to communication. So this, we were quite lucky to see that we had quite some detailed information with regard to the numbers. In terms of how this integrates clearly with financial access, I think we were able to go another step further and look at the integration of the Kenya population household census with regard to the 2021 FinAccess Household Survey. Now, the interesting thing is both of these surveys were able to come in and disaggregate the level of FinAccess as per the county. We have what is almost called a federal system kind of unit in the country. And out of the 47 counties, we're able to determine where are the disabled persons and where are the financial access challenges within the 47 counties. So a quick overlay of the two reports, a quick overlay of the two datas actually came up with something very interesting for us. And we discovered that quite a number of the people who have challenges with disability or other persons with disabilities are all within the urban settings. And the interesting thing is the urban settings, we are all talking about more than 85% of financial inclusivity. I think also what has helped us as a country is the element of mobile financial services, whereby it's now a norm. I think Kenya has been known well enough for the M-Pesas and all that. It's a norm. Everybody has it. And I think we'll talk about it in detail later on. Even the kind of applications that are coming in within helping even the persons with disabilities to be able to interact quite easily with the tools that are available. So that's just an overview. I will go into the details later on. There are quite a few reports that we've been able to see around, for example, like the much recent report from 2023 by an institution called the Kenya Site Savers, which has come up with quite some bit of numbers on PWDs, and also the customer survey of the Kenya Bankers Association of 2020. But in detail, we will look at that as we go ahead. So thank you for that, Sulita, and I hope that this has opened up quite a bit from our end.
No, thank you so much, Evans, for this very concise yet very comprehensive introduction on Kenya's experience. You're touching on the data importance and availability in Kenya, which is really, really important and interesting, and also mentioning, of course, the importance of technology in these efforts and understanding, of course, of the needs and activities that can be tailored in this direction. Thank you so much, Evans. Let me invite now Nasrin to provide us with an overview on the same in your respective jurisdiction. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you for inviting me. First of all, I want to express my sincere appreciation for the report presented by FUTU. It's very excellent report, and flow and organization of report is very impressive, and area covered in the report is also very comprehensive. I think this report can be used as a source for reviewing our policies and implement and change in policies for financial inclusion of PWDs. Regarding state of Pakistan, we have population of 230 million. And as per and registered number of PWDs is only 3 to 4%. But number of unregistered PWDs must be much more higher than this. As per international standard, we estimate that 10 to 15% would be PWDs. And the data of financial inclusion of PWDs is also unavailable. We estimate that very nominal population have access to financial services. However, we have taken various initiatives to increase access of PWDs to financial services. And in the session, I will discuss these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nasrin. This is a very interesting opening as well to understand better how this topic is approached in Pakistan. I'd like to invite Clarence. Clarence, if you're still here, if you could kindly give us a few words of introduction in Ghana's activities and situation. Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon from Abuja, and thank you for having me on this call. This is a very important subject as we try globally to expand access to financial service. And this very group is a marginalized group, and this effort is going to go a long way to bring them to the financial inclusion table. Having said that, if we look at the data from the global funders, we realize that financial inclusion is on an upward trend in Ghana. 2014, about 41%, 2017, 58%, and 2021, 68%. If we look at the gender gap for 2014 was 4% in favor of men, and 2017 it was 8%, and in 2021 it was 11%. I'm putting out these figures for the fact that women generally suffer when it comes to financial inclusion, access to financial services. And if you look at the bigger picture, considering those who are disabled or persons living with disability, this then means that their situation is likely to be exacerbated. However, we do not have figures, as other speakers have said, on persons with a disability access to financial service. So Ghana worked with the GIZ on a project to find out the persons with disability access to financial service, the challenges that they are having, in order to inform policies to address the challenges that the persons with disability have in accessing financial service. Based on that report, Ghana currently has drafted a policy to promote financial access to persons with disability. But let me put a few figures here. The estimate is that we have about 3% of the total population of Ghana, which is estimated at 32, 33, depending on the type of estimate you are using, that are disabled. And from the figures we have so far, about 60% of them are physically disabled. Those who have sight challenges, maybe about 20. The hearing, we're looking about 10. And the other combination of disability, we're looking at about 6% thereabout. But if you look at the percentage in relation to the population, we're talking about 1 million people. This is quite significant, and it is a population that one has to do everything possible to bring into the financial service space. In the absence of a policy from the regulator, we have noted that largely most of the financial service companies, financial service providers, do not have policies in place for the promotion of access to financial service to people who are living with some disability, except one. And also, it is the same entity that also has programs in place to train staff to be able to cater to the needs of a disabled person. So the effort of Bank of Ghana currently is to finalize the policy in collaboration with the industry so that it goes to implement it. But before this policy comes into force, already there are provisions in the various legislations, including the Banks and Specialized Deposit-Taking Institutions Act, which leverage some sections from Act 2006 on the Disability Act to try and compel banks to provide disability-friendly facilities so that the disabled can access their service, the banking service. But this is not comprehensive enough. And that is the reason why we are coming out with a policy to tackle that issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clarence. I think this gives us a very nice array of experience activities and examples for our panel discussion today. I'd just like to mention that even though we have allocated a Q&A session after this discussion, I'd like to invite everyone to really don't hesitate to maybe ask any question in the chat at any time. Feel free to contribute as well by unmuting yourself if you'd like to ask questions in live to our esteemed speakers, or even if you'd like to share some of your own country experience, as I think the report compiles really good policy experience and recommendation on the topic, but I'm sure we can always learn even more and continue building on this peer learning and exchange from both speakers and participants. So this is just a quick note, inviting everyone to contribute as much as you wish through the chat at least. And thank you very much again, Evans, Nasreen, and Clarence, for your introductory word. So now that we have a bit of the global context in Kenya, Pakistan, and Ghana, I'd like to know a little bit more on the key challenges. I know you all had mentioned a few of these challenges in your respective jurisdiction, but if you could please share a bit more on the specific challenges that persons with disabilities face when it comes to accessing financial services, and how these challenges are currently or could be addressed through collective efforts in the future. Thanks a lot, and let me invite Nasreen to start with.
Do I start, or who is starting?
Sorry,
Thank you.
I'm doing randomly, but of course, feel free to come in. I just invited Nasreen for this one. And
Thank you,
thanks,
Sanita.
Clarence.
Thank you, Sanita. Regarding SPP journey of financial inclusion of PWDs, promotion of diversity and inclusion is an important pillar of SBP overall policy framework aimed at financial system deepening. In this context, in order to provide equitable access to banking services in 2014, instructions were issued to banks to provide preferential treatment and out-of-queue assistance to all PWDs. Banks were also advised to make their branches and ATMs accessible for PWDs by constructing ramps and installing talking ATMs. The bank were, in order to ensure compliance with the requirement, reporting requirement was also prescribed. Since PWDs with hearing, since visually impaired persons were facing more difficulty in accessing financial services, therefore in 2014, general guidelines were also issued to facilitate banking services to visually impaired and blind person. These guidelines covered instruction pertaining to opening and operations of bank account, debit credit card, phone, internet banking, lockers, and extension of loans. Banks were also advised to arrange printing of all related stationery form in Braille form. In 2021, in order to enhance inclusion of PWDs as employees as well as customer of banks, further additional guidelines were issued in collaboration with NGOs and banks. Under these guidelines, banks were instructed to make arrangements to ensure inclusion of financial PWDs as their employees. They were advised to ensure that prescribed quota for PWD should be hired. In this policy, special attention was given to female PWDs. Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
In these guidelines, special attention was given to female PWDs, and banks were advised that at least 25% of prescribed quota should be allocated to female employees. The banks were also advised to change their HR policy to meet the need of PWDs. That is recruitment, selection, promotion, and all other related policies. An important feature of this instruction was introduction of concept of model branches. These model branches were expected to serve the purpose of center of excellence. In these model branches, banks were required to provide all sort of infrastructure, structural and physical and other accessible document for the use of PWDs. It means they were required to provide time foring, height-adjusted ATM, talking ATMs, and interpreter services of interpreter and additionally they were also required to provide braille document, and they were also provided to ensure that the PWDs entering into the branch premises are given preferential treatment, and bank were also advised to provide all sort of banking services to the PWDs. Hello?
Yes. Thank you so much, Nasreen.
Enhanced focus was, the objective of this policy was to ensure that the PWDs, once the PWDs enter into a bank as employee, then the opportunity of financial inclusion of PWDs would be enhanced. And we have also made some reporting requirements has also been prescribed to ensure that the bank comply with this requirement. This is about our policies and initiative about PWDs.
Thanks a lot, Nasreen. I think this is a very extensive list of activities and policies and efforts put in place here, and it's really insightful to hear about all the work in that direction. So thank you so much for your intervention on these examples of initiatives that can be put in place. You've also mentioned the importance to focus on women. I think we also heard from Evans and Clarence's introduction on the specific target group. So I'd like to build on that. And Clarence, if you could kindly share a little bit more on specific challenges that you could share in Ghana, especially on persons with disabilities access to financial services, and also maybe what specific challenges do women with disabilities encounter that may distinguish them from other segments based on your own experience. Thank you, Clarence.
Thank you, Solita. If we look at the study that we conducted, the GSA conducted in collaboration with Bank of Ghana, a lot of barriers to PWD's access to financial service came up. The challenges could be categorized into those at the supply side as well as the demand side. And what we realized was that PWDs have subcategories: the physical, the mental, those who have a hearing challenge, as well as sight challenges. What we realized was that in the absence of a national policy to promote financial inclusion of PWDs, financial service providers are not compelled in a way to provide service that meet the needs of this subcategory of the excluded persons. We also noted that because there's lack of policy in place, that compulsion to get them to do something is not there. Internally, there are also not policies by financial service providers to guide them. By extension, the customers of banks are not going to get that service. Those we realize are PWDs that are accessing this service are persons who might have signed on based on their employment, on their social standing, economic standing to financial service already, or they could have been able persons and somewhere along the line became disabled. But the challenge is, what about those people who were born with disability, economically disadvantaged, and do not have the educational background? We also realize that there are no directions in place for bank staff to even treat persons with disability who come in to access service from them. So if you have a good heart and you are good at interacting with people, then you can treat them well. Others also see them as beggars and do not want to entertain them in their premises. And we also realize that the materials available for explaining product information are not friendly to the disabled. And when they even get to the banking hall and they want to seek additional information, they are considered a border. For women, they face a double challenge. The double challenge stems from sociocultural issues where disabled persons sometimes are considered marginal citizens and will not be able to make any meaningful contribution economic-wise to society. So some of them do not have access to educational facilities, are not educated. Some of them do not even have trade skills, and they engage in petty trading. Getting the means to even access financial service also becomes a problem. And these are some of the challenges, especially the women disabled persons face. So they do not even have transactional records, let alone build a strong record to be able to access credit. We also noticed that if the woman disabled comes from a well-to-do home, then there are all the support for her to excel. But those who are the extreme end of the economic and social ladder are consigned to perpetual poverty, and that reinforces their exclusion from the financial service industry.
Thank you, Clarence. Before I invite Evans on the same question, could you kindly share maybe any initiatives that Bank of Ghana has developed and or implemented to maybe respond to a few of these challenges? And if so, if you have any impact elements that you could share with us today, that would be also very interesting. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, whilst we wait to firm up the policy document, Bank of Ghana, under the auspices of AFI, is implementing inclusion and diversity program. And banks are required to ensure that women and excluded persons in society are properly catered for in their services as well as in their employment. Currently, I normally hesitate to mention names, but when it is public, it is easy for one to mention names. Standard Chartered Bank in Ghana has a strong program on inclusion and diversity, which is making a lot of waves there. And Bank of Ghana advocacy program, as well as other policies on the gender inclusion and diversity, is also helping banks to begin to shake themselves up with some policies to address some of these challenges whilst we try to firm up what we have in place. We recognize that the policy will do a lot to provide guidance to financial service providers to deal with the peculiar challenges of persons living with a disability. But we also recognize that it's important that a corresponding or complementary strategy is implemented to bring everybody on board to appreciate the need to serve that market, so that if any sanctions with non-compliance with some of the provisions is going to be applied at all, we'll look at a few exceptional areas. We recognize that sometimes as financial service providers consider PWDs as minority, and they are always looking at it from revenue perspective. But we are looking at social responsibility, inclusion, and a good corporate citizen perspective that will have to be enforced, because inclusion is critical to inclusive economic growth. And this will help also address some kind of externality that is out there, negative externalities that are out there. So we've seen a lot of attraction on the part of financial service providers wanting to prove that they care about the society, they care about the excluded, they care about the marginalized in the Ghanaian society. Thank you.
No, wonderful. Thanks a lot, Clarence. I think this is very, very important indeed, and thank you for sharing these initiatives. We have a comment from Helen in the chat, just reinforcing the fact that the point about intersectionality of disadvantage with gender, disability, and poverty is a triple barrier for people, and you can't tackle one aspect without working on the other. It needs a holistic approach. Thank you so much, Helen. And I think this gives us also a nice transition to hear from Evans on the same question on both existing challenges that you have identified and maybe any focus initiative, including focus on women disadvantaged target group. Thanks a lot, Evans.
Thank you, Sulita, once again. The challenges with regard to PWDs, I think, cross-cuts every part of sub-Saharan Africa, if I would say so. So when I hear some of the examples being cited before, I think they really touch, they're more of the same kind of examples that we do have. One of the greatest challenges that PWDs had in Kenya was with regard to physical accessibility. So you'll find that many banks and their branches, their ATMs, do not even have, for example, simple things like ramps to give them access into the facility, into the banking halls. So if someone walks in, drives in with his wheelchair, he probably has to be lifted. But I must say that those are some of the things that have kept on changing over time, and we have seen great strides in terms of almost all the financial institutions adopting that, if not all, that enhance physical accessibility to their premises. There's also the element of digital accessibility, which goes hand in hand with the financial literacies. So the challenges there, you find that there are online banking services, online banking platforms that are being introduced. And not all these platforms really think about the PWDs when they are being developed. So as a solution to that, we really keep in pace and ensure that the commercial banks and even the microfinance banks are always looking at the digital platforms that are designed for everybody, not segregating to particular groups. And that also touches with financial literacy so that you can have everybody educated. But I think for us in Africa, and particularly in Kenya, one of the biggest challenges stood out to be stigma and discrimination. That was always a challenge. I think I've heard that has been mentioned by Clarence in passing. And you realize that the fact that someone is disabled, particularly from a lower class of the society, if I would say so, the person faces more challenges even with regard to getting the financial access, financial products, even to within his reach. And so you find that there's always that statement that says the poor always remain poor. Well, that's not true. But then you realize that if the poor is a disabled person, then it even becomes harder for them even to get up and reach out to the next cadre of society. So this is one of the biggest challenges, stigma and discrimination. But I think all these things touch up to the kind of legal environment that we have put within a country. And for us in Kenya, I would be very practical to say that the first thing that we know is that the greatest law in the country, which happens to be the Constitution, has developed clear-cut lines that prohibit any form of discrimination against people with disability. Touching that again with women, it even goes ahead and gives more of a leverage to women so that you can bring women out of the disadvantaged position. We call it, the word is just disappearing, but it's more of bringing everybody back to the same level. So you have a case of women, you have a case of the PWDs who are given the priorities within the Constitution, and it's expected that everybody is going to actually comply. That has now worked quite well with regard to formation of even laws that are specific to PWDs. Kenya has developed acts that are very specific to PWDs. The Kenyan banking and financial institutions have developed policies which are very specific to encouraging PWDs to come on board, the PWDs recognition, and even for us within the central bank ourselves. I think I mentioned that, I think in the introduction, Sulita, you were very clear that we developed a currency in 2019 and 2018. And for the first time for us, we decided, you know what, we have to put the PWDs on board. So we had to engage even institutions like Kenya Society for the Blind. And we discovered from the Kenya Society of the Blind that out of 100% people who are visually impaired, only 3% happen to be totally blind. So how do we take care of that and that sector of the community? So we started putting in elements that they'll have to use their fingers, because that's their third eye, if I would say. They use their fingers to be able to identify braille-like effects on the currencies, on the notes and the coins. And that is just part of the ways, the actions that we have been able to put in place to enable us bring on board all these people with challenges in terms of PWDs from various cadres. So the laws, I would say, are very important. And once you have the key law of the land, which is the Constitution, taking care and making sure that it has covered the PWDs, then the rest falls into place, because everybody now starts drawing down their policies, their regulations, their guidelines, the acts from the main supreme law of the land. And that's the case for Kenya. Thank you, Sulita.
Thanks a lot, Evans. That's extremely interesting. And I'd like to maybe build a little bit more on the technology component that you have mentioned. I'm not sure if you could share any type of specific technologies, any examples that is currently being used in your jurisdiction to promote financial inclusion for persons with disabilities, or that you are considering working on in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sulita. So indeed, that's true. You know, when we talked about, and I always like this, when we talk about Kenya, M-Pesa always comes into play. And so there are quite a number of things that the M-Pesa mobile banking apps, for example, have come into put. So we have text and voice alerts. Banks are now using SMS or voice alerts to provide PWDs with real-time information about their account balances, transactions, and payment reminders, and that improves their awareness on the financial status. The ATMs as well. The ATMs have also got braille-like features, which they're able to help the visually impaired persons to use them. Accessibility to these ATMs is also done well enough. Now we've talked about the ramps, so that you can have even people with physical mobility challenges being able to access the ATMs. You'll always find an ATM that is on a lower level to be able to interact with it. Mobile banking apps. The banks right now, almost every bank in the country I can imagine about has a mobile banking app that is active, and it can incorporate the PWDs in their use. But I think if I would specifically go to the mobile financial services, I think there have been development of tools for the visually impaired persons that are working pretty well. For example, right now we've got an app that you do not need a password to pay your transactions, but all you need is your fingerprint. So if you've got a smartphone that has got a fingerprint enabled facility, Then you have the app and you integrate the two of them together, and you can be able to pay without even keying in your password, which again is a security enabled item, but at the same time also enables the visually impaired persons to be able to pay even without typing the passwords for their apps. There have been also interactive voice responses, or that's the IVRs that have come into place. There are the dot braille watches that have been put in by the mobile financial services. These are just examples of a few elements, even for the Central Bank of Kenya coming up with the currency. These are just some of the examples that I can think about that have helped to improve the PWDs coming on board.
Thank you so much, Evans, for these examples, and these are really well noted. I'd like to take maybe a few minutes to hear from our participants. If there is anyone in the webinar today who'd like to come in and maybe share any other challenges, or just to share similar challenges that you have faced in your own countries and jurisdiction, or maybe any other examples of current activities that you're currently working on. It could be, for example, on this technology dimension that Evans just touched base on. Let's see if everyone would like to come in and share additional experience, or you're also welcome to come in with questions at this stage.
Yeah, Solita, I think
Yes.
let me add a few things on technology.
Sure, please.
If you look at the spectrum of disability, mobile money has been very useful in overcoming some of the challenges of mobility. And that has been also be useful in the area of non-collateralized loan, where you don't even see the face of the person, but you use the person's digital footprint to be able to assess the eligibility or suitability for a loan. With regards to those who may be visually impaired, in the area of a consumer protection and access to information, there are some voice prompt information that are provided by the service providers. And it's also helping, but that is at the initial stage. I believe those functionalities have been provided, not necessarily with the visually impaired in mind, but with the efforts that the Bank of Ghana is making in that direction. They are beginning to take a second look at what they have and make it more friendly. The third thing is that Bank of Ghana work with GIC on a hackathon for creative minds in the technology space to come up with solutions to address the peculiar challenges of PWD's access to financial service. And it will interest you to know that some of the participants were okay visually, but somewhere along the line, they lost their sight. And they were able to bring their experience from where they could see to the point of time that they lost their sight to be able to come up with very innovative solutions. They are currently engaging with Bank of Ghana as to how best some of these solutions can be adopted and diffused to the wider society. So inclusiveness, letting the voice of the PWDs be heard, and policy making is critical to addressing their peculiar needs. And this is one thing that I want to bring to the attention for. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Clarence, for this complimentary information. It's very important indeed.
So, Rita,
and
I
very
want to
interesting. Yes, Nasrin, please come in. Thank you.
I want to add something. In Pakistan, our banks are also offering WhatsApp, internet banking, and remote account opening facilities to all persons, including PWDs. But in case of PWDs, main problem is that internet. Because internet availability for PWDs and other population living in rural area is very less, and they don't have smartphones. So State Bank has taken an initiative and introduced Asan mobile account scheme. This Asan mobile account can be opened by using USSD code without having internet. Our operation in this account can be opened offline by you have to select a code, send a code to a bank, and then your account is opened within minutes. And operation of the account can be made through this mobile without using internet. And this is very, very important initiative, and it has very good result. The number of account has increased to millions of numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nasrin, for your addition. I think we are hearing really good examples here, and also of the very connected topic that we are discussing today, and how it touches based on very different dimension, all the way from a strategic approach on how to work on the NFIs, for example, and how to compile as much data as possible on the demand side as well. And now we are hearing examples of the importance of thinking through technologic solutions. Thank you, Evans, Clarence, and Nasrin, for your inputs. I'll still take a few minutes to see if anyone from the audience would like to come in and share any other experience. All right, perfect. Maybe we'll hear more at a later stage. This is totally fine. Nasrin, maybe, let me see. Thank you, Farah, for your message. So Farah in the chat is asking if you could share any efforts to model financial products, specifically targeting people with disabilities, not just to improve its access. Thank you, Farah, for the question. And I'm not sure who would like to come in with an answer. So the question is if anyone could share efforts to model financial products specifically targeting people with disabilities. So in addition to example of activities that we heard to improve access to financial services, how can these specific products and services in themselves could be specifically built to meet the specific needs of these target groups?
Probably I would have a go. I think Clarence mentioned something about the Standard Chartered, if I remember well. And I think this is one of the financial institutions that we have seen also in Kenya, working very directly with the visually impaired to come up with strategies that will take care of them. They even go ahead and offer an annual marathon, for example, and you all know about Kenyans and they are running prowess. So this is the point: you meet any Kenyan and they will tell you, I can run a mile, even if they cannot run. So with such kind of events, you find Kenyans coming on board and supporting initiatives that are taking place from an institution like Standard Chartered. And they go ahead and even develop products that are clearly developed for this kind of marginalized, if I would say, communities or groups. We've also found out that some microfinance institutions have also been playing quite a key role, particularly when it comes to women and PWDs. So they have created products that are designed to attract the women on board, and they have also created products that are specifically designed to attracting the PWDs to their banking services. Now, the catch about all this is working with the PWD advocacy groups. Now, this is something that we probably are going to touch on later, but I think one of the key things that is important is we don't work on our own merits. We as regulators, we as financial institution experts, we shouldn't really work on our own thoughts processes in developing products for the PWDs, but we should really come down and work directly with the PWD groups, PWDs themselves, and be able to come up with products and services that are geared towards meeting their needs. The challenge I know we've had in Kenya, for example, is there are numerous of these groups. I mean, recently I was looking at the number and I discovered there are more than 300 organizations that deal with PWDs in the country. And I think that's just an underestimate. And you find, for example, one institution deals with the blind, another one deals with the blind, another one deals with the blind. So you've got a multiplicity of organizations. So who do you work with? So I think the most important thing is to find out a common ground, that you're working with people who will gain your momentum and you're able to come up with develop products that are really going to be suitable for them based on a populace from within the advocacy groups that will work for you. So I think that's how to look at it. Work with advocacy groups, work with the PWD groups, but at the same time, work towards developing strategies that will help them as opposed to our own ideas, thoughts, and processes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evans. I think this is very important indeed to emphasize on the fact that many practical solutions can be physically developed. And here it's really also important to work with as many stakeholders as possible to make sure everything is embedded and implemented in a very coordinated approach, not only to ensure good access, but usage and quality of these products and services. I'll build on that, but there is just a second question in the chat from Dina, who's asking if you could recommend any applications recommended as implementation, so technology application, specifically for implementing activities. So I think we heard element of answers in previous interventions, but I'm not sure if Clarence or Nasrin, you'd like to come in for this second element of questions.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll take this one. The first thing that one has to do is to know the state of PWDs in the country and the access to financial service. What are the challenges? It is quite tempting for one to sit in his cozy or her cozy office to come out with what one thinks as the challenges in the industry. So some kind of research to get to know the state of affairs. And also if there is a body responsible for PWDs, maybe different categories for the mentally challenged, physically challenged, visually challenged, you bring all of them together and you listen to them. What are their challenges? You also look at the supply side to the financial service providers. What are their challenges? Based on that, one can come up with a strategy to deal with the issues. It's not one size fits all. There are certain elements that will be cross-cutting. In fact, the KYC issue is something that one cannot do away with. However, if you have a national identification system in place, especially one that is biometric enabled, then you can use that as a basis of doing the KYC to onboard them. eKYC is also available after you have collected the initial information. Information can be passported from one financial service provider to another as a means of this accessing service from different financial providers. Mind you, some of them, whether visually impaired or physically challenged, movement is a problem. So making some of these infrastructure, let me put it that way, available to them helps for them to access different types of financial service without the need to move around. The other thing that also one has to look at is education, both at the supply side and the demand side. This is what Standard Chartered Bank has been able to do very well. They will bend front wells to meet them, but those who are in the PWDs category will also meet them halfway. That means that some kind of educational program will have to be instituted to create awareness to them about financial service, how they can access this service, and how they can make very good, effective use of these services, so that it becomes easier for the supply side when they have prepared themselves with knowledge and skills to be able to meet them halfway. The last but not the least is the effective use of technology to address the needs of the PWDs. So in this case, remotely you can serve them, but also make it easier for them to interact with the technology. And this again will require some test and see approach. You develop the solution, a small group, you get them to test it, see how effective it is for them to be able to access financial services, including consumer protection when they want to even lodge a complaint. And when you find that all the bugs are out and everybody is okay with it, then you can go ahead. But you cannot do that alone as a regulator. You always have to have the financial service providers because they are the ones that are going to interact on a regular basis with the PWDs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clarence, for the very global approach here, which is extremely important, right? It's not only about developing very specific tools, but touching base on all the dimensions you have covered is really important to consider. So thanks again. I'd like to touch base also on the point from Evans previously on the importance and sometimes the challenge to identify and work efficiently with all stakeholders involved. With work for persons with disabilities. So Nasreen, this question will be for you. I'm not sure if you would be able to share any key organizations representing persons with disabilities in your country, and also why do you think it's important to work with them, include them in all these efforts to work with PWDs, and if not all of them, if they're as numerous as Evans mentioned in Kenya, how do you categorize them and prioritize? Thank you, Nasreen.
Thank you, Sunita. In Pakistan, a number of organizations are working on PWDs related affairs. Most famous are now PWD, Pakistan Disabled Foundation, and for Disabled Person Advocacy Group. Regarding importance of participation of NGOs, while we in 2021 we have issued framework for PWDs, and this framework was developed in collaboration with NGOs because they have ground level experience of working with PWDs. They know what are their challenges, what are their issues, and what they want, what are their needs. So while implementing any policy measure, you need to work with NGOs because they can tell you the accessibility requirement, and they can also update you about the best practices. Similarly, while designing any product for PWDs, there is need to work with NGOs from initial stage of product development till end, because while working with PWDs, they would tell you what should be the feature of the design, and while working, and they would ensure that their population, their member know what product is available and how this product can be used by PWDs. Therefore, for success of any product, any initiative working with PWDs is very important. And an important thing, someone has asked question about technology application. If you want to implement some technology in your country, then the best source for information is NGO, because they work with PWDs and they know what technologies, what type of screen reader, what type of software are used by these PWDs. Therefore, therefore they will provide you insight about these technology option available in the market. Further, these NGOs can work with banks to integrate their technology with software available in the market for PWDs. And additional feature, NGOs can coordinate between developer of technology and financial institutions, so that the solution which is provided for PWDs to bank is meet the need of PWDs in best way. So at every stage of policy, especially when we implement some policy, then we need to see how it is effective. Then the best source again is PWDs. They conduct research and they have data about the accessibility issue and everything. So there are data can be used for developing any solution, and knowing effectiveness of your policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen. This is really well noted. And we have a follow-up question here from Susanna in Alexandrian in the chat for you. So you mentioned that you have a number of requirements in place for banks and ATMs to ensure access for PWDs. Must all branches of banks and all ATMs comply with this requirement, or only one or a few branches or ATMs? Over to you, Nasreen.
Some requirements are applicable on all branches, that is construction of ramp in the branches and construction of ramp in ATM cubicles. However, some requirements like talking ATM, we have bank have been advised to coordinate with each other so that in one area at least one talking ATM is available. So the requirement, similarly, other requirement like availability of interpreter, sign interpreter. These the requirement as per requirement in model branches, sign interpreter is must. But for other branches, through video call and other sources, bank can provide that. Similarly, braille documents and forms. Banks are required to make available these forms in braille form at one branch and ensure that the PWDs coming to some other branch should be provided these form from that branch where these are available. So in this way, the all requirement of all PWDs is captured. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasrin. Thanks a lot. So from Natalia, so again in the chat, sorry, I will just read out loud. So more than a question is a suggestion for supervisors and regulators to evaluate the use herding behavior nudges upon financial service providers and stakeholders by public praising those that have engaged in proper financial literacy program and new financial services and product design for persons with disabilities. It has proven to be very effective since no financial service providers want to be left behind or unrecognized. Thanks a lot, Natalia. And I think this is a perfect transition for my next question for the panelists, and once again open to any further input from the audience on financial literacy education awareness. So I hear CEMEC working group members input here. Thanks a lot. So we have mentioned the very diverse categories of this target group, right? So there are different physical disabilities, but also mental disabilities. And it was mentioned a few times in this discussion today, the importance of education and financial education. So we heard on the stigma dimension, so maybe the need for raising awareness for the global public as well, and really intending to raise financial literacy efforts for persons with disabilities, but also for financial service providers, as we have heard, I think, from Clarence, if I'm not mistaken. So linking with this, I'd like to hear from the three of you, if you could share what is your view on how financial literacy and education program can be specifically tailored to serve this target group, and how important it is, in your opinion, to increase access, usage, and quality of products and services for persons with disabilities. Nasrin?
Again, I think for any financial program to be successful, it should be initiated in collaboration with the NGOs, because they know the requirement, they have interaction with their members. So the best strategy would be to design program in collaboration with the NGOs and implement this program in collaboration with. Even in our instruction, we have advised banks to train their staff. And in case of training of staff as well, I think NGOs can be very productive, because the most problem faced by PWDs is related to behavioral issue. And NGOs are very excellent in dealing these issues. So while for training of bank staff as well, the NGO should be consulted, and they should have their input for designing program for bank staff as well as for public, for PWDs and anyone else.
Thank you, Nasrin. This is very well noted. I'd like to invite Evans to maybe share a bit more on the same.
Thank you, Sulita. I think the element of financial literacy needs to be a two-way channel, if I would say so. You've got one push from the financial institutions, including the regulators, with a desire to ensure that information with regard to the products, the services, the accessibility, all reaches down to the PWDs. But we've also got the reverse shift, which also needs to come from the PWD groups and the PWD advocacy groups, if I would say so, pushing back to the financial regulators and financial institutions to be able to bridge that knowledge gap that is also there. One of the things that we have clearly expounded on is the fact that no size fits all. And we within the financial institutions and the financial regulatory spaces may not be able to understand everything that is required for the PWDs. And the challenge of that, of course, is if we're not careful, we might end up trying to push for a one traffic route towards implementation of things. But that may not be the right solution. So how about if we get information coming from across the other side that will also enable us to be able to design and come up with systems and policies and practices that will be able to work well for the PWDs. So in my view, financial literacy is, whereas we think all about it all the time in a one-way traffic, it really needs to be a two-way traffic. Both sides to be able to learn from each other and be able to work together within all these groups or their representative groups to be able to come up with a solution that will work for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Evans. I couldn't agree more. Thank you for your inputs. Before I take another question we have in the chat, let's hear from Clarence first on your view on the financial literacy and education component, especially for mental disabilities target group.
Yeah, hello.
Hi. Yes, we can hear you.
For the mental disability, the financial literacy approach there would have to be carefully thought through. And one should be careful as to what one wants to achieve. There are people who might have had mental challenge somewhere along the line. There are others who may have a certain level of lucidity in the course of the year and they are on medication. To be able to communicate to these people, it is a matter of trust. It's a matter of trust. So in that case, one has to work with specialists that give care to persons within that category to be able to design a product, a financial literacy solution that will meet their specific needs, and work together with them to be able to address that need. Because this is a special group within the PWDs, and dealing with their issues require careful planning and working with persons that are trusted by this subgroup of PWDs.
Thank you, Clarence, for this very important addition. To move on, let me quickly cover the chat's input from Anis from Bank Negara Malaysia. So thanks, Anis, for connecting late. It's really good to read from you here in the chat. So it was observed during industry consultation that some financial service providers suggested to exclude non-physical impairment from the definition of a person with disability/vulnerable consumer, simply because the impairments are less apparent to be identified and verified. They worry about consumer potentially abusing the status of a vulnerable consumer. There is also this concern from the public on how disclosing an impairment may work against vulnerable persons with disabilities consumers and result in financial exclusion. For example, being denied access to a financial product, for example, a loan or insurance product. I think this builds also on Evan's points just before. So the question is, how do you think we can mitigate any unintended consequences like this in developing policies to address the needs of persons with disabilities? Thank you so much. And I'm not sure who would like to give a go for this question.
Okay, Sulita, this is quite an interesting question, but a true observation, because you are faced with a situation of disclosure of your disability. Sometimes does it work to your advantage or does it work against you? faced with a situation about financial products that you want to reach out for? Is it that you disclose your disability to be able to get this financial product or not? And then how does it work for you? I mean, I think 3 weeks ago, we had a minister, a cabinet secretary in Kenya speaking in the public, and that was quite an interesting observation, that there are many people who right now are working and putting forward cases of acquired disabilities over time. And these disabilities may not necessarily be apparent or seen by anybody, but they're putting cases of those acquired disabilities for the purpose of extending their stay in service, if I would say so, for employment. So I think what Anis has clearly touched on goes back to such kind of situations. First of all, there are challenges. Are they genuine? Are they not genuine? Are they being used for the purpose of favoring them to get something that they really desired to get or not? So the policies really need to be addressed well enough. But at the same time, it's also very tricky because you can also touch on a policy that will end up looking like it's discriminatory, because it could be true that somebody has a genuine case of disability and you come up with a policy that indicates that disability after a certain point in time, for example, cannot be considered as a disability. So how do we balance all that? So I think the dice is really hard to cast and determine which side it falls on. But I think there's always a continuous learning process and continuous engagement process to be able to come up with the right policies and that target the right people and be able to cover everybody equally. I'm just trying to beat around the bush because it's really a difficult question to answer. Thank you, Solita.
No, I agree with you, and thanks a lot, Evans, for this element of answer here. Let's see if Nasrin or Clarence would like to add anything, or if you go in the same direction of answer. Great. I think this is indeed. Sorry, I'm closing the chat. Wonderful. Thanks, Anis, for your answer, and thank you so much, Evans, for jumping here, knowing that this is indeed a question that doesn't have a unique answer and that really needs to be considered with all the elements at hand and maybe in a very evolving and adaptive dimension. We do have 15 minutes left for this discussion, including questions, so please continue to ask anything you have in mind in the chat. Feel free to come in again. And as I don't see any further question for the time being, I'll continue with mine, but feel free to come in at any time to hear from our very interesting panelists' intervention. Maybe before I move to the next question, I'd just like to share quickly in the chat a link. This is a knowledge product that was developed by members of the Consumer Empowerment and Market Conduct Working Group. So it only touches very lightly on persons with disabilities, but still it gives some, I believe, some interesting indications on how you could consider these specific target groups into your existing or in progress financial education program. So this is just a FYI in case you find this interesting. Another topic that was raised by Robin in his presentation of the publication is COVID-19. So maybe let's take the few minutes that we have left in this discussion today to hear a bit from our panelists on how do you think the COVID-19 pandemic did indeed affect financial inclusion of persons with disabilities? Did you see any specific challenges arising in this period, or was it not that striking? And also, what specific recommendation do you have for building greater resilience in financial inclusion strategies for this target group in the future, for future crises or any disruptions, any lessons that you may have learned from this COVID-19 time? Thank you so much, and open to anyone who would like to come in first.
Well, let me have a go at it. If you survey, I believe if you survey the responses of central banks and policymakers, the interventions during the COVID-19 pandemic, I haven't come across any country, I may be wrong, but for all the documents that I've looked, I'm not saying it's not exhaustive. I've not come across any country that has specific intervention for PWDs, and that's the same for Ghana. And for us, the lessons that we've gotten from this is that it is important for one to have a policy that focuses on a particular group of excluded persons to be able to address their needs effectively by making sure that the right resources are made available to them. If one looks at the challenges that came up during the COVID-19 and the increased use of digital technology in a place of physical interaction with service providers for financial service, it means that digital technology has a lot to offer to include persons with disability. The mobile money solution is good for those who are not visually impaired, but may suffer some lack of mobility in a way. What about those who are visually impaired? What happens to them? So here, the challenge to all of us here is to look at a digital solution that can address the needs of PWDs at a distance. No one is wishing for another pandemic, but the success of digital technology in granting access to financial service during the time that we were mandated to stay away from offices and public places is a testament to the capabilities of the technology in bringing about inclusion within the PWDs category. So it is something that one has to look at. But in the absence of the policy targeting the PWDs, from what one sees, it appears they would have fallen through the cracks, except those who already were included in a way.
Thank you so much, Clarence. This is very well noted. I see Evan's camera on. Would you like to come in as well?
Yeah, thank you, Salita. I think I'd like just to chip in, and I wouldn't agree with Clarence more. In terms of data, in terms of research, that has really been scarce. And I think many things probably are alluding to that. Probably the way the pandemic came, it really hit people quite hard. There was no time to be able to sit down and do some quick studies on the same. So the same case for us in Kenya, not much data or research has been conducted on this area. However, this is what we observed. I am coming from a point where cash is the primary transaction module. And I think I have also touched about some of the things that we did with regard to putting cash features for the PWDs. So from our point, we observed the usage of cash initially was thought of as a threat for people to get COVID. And as a result of that, the use of physical cash really went down initially. That meant that even the PWDs who had been catered for in the cash developments were at a disadvantage. They were not able to use this particular product that had been designed for them. Additionally, at the height of the pandemic, there was also closure of physical service points. You remember there was shutdowns everywhere. Banks included, they had moments to operate, and even the kind of proximities that restrictions that they had put in. Government offices, some of them shut down. I think we had about government staff who were actually out of office during the entire pandemic period. So even the service level activities were really down for the PWDs, not only just with the general public, but also the PWDs. And to access these essential services, including financial services, was a challenge. Then the introduction of lockdowns and restrictions also reduced the public transportations. Reduction of public transportations also made it challenging for PWDs to access even the physical banking facilities, including ATMs, unless the ATM was probably very close to you. Additionally, there was also reduced income resulting from economic disruptions. Quite a number of people lost their jobs. And the PWDs were also affected by this. This exacerbated all the challenges that were coming in with regard to financial inclusion. And finally, though not documented again, the pandemic really brought in quite a number of stresses, and negatively, people's mental health were affected. So we are not only just talking about PWDs that were there before, but we also started seeing quite a number of people moving towards mental stresses. And we don't know the outcome of that or whether it could lead to another group of mental PWDs. But also the state of the physical and psychological instability within the country really went up. So COVID had an impact. Whether the research has been done or not, I think just from the daily living and watching what is happening around, really COVID had quite a negative impact, which many countries are now trying to come out of right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evans. These are really practical considerations that we indeed need to build on and consider in all our efforts here. And let's hear from Nasreen on the same topic. Thank you so much.
Yes. During COVID, no special policy measures were initiated for PWDs, but regulations related to online banking were relaxed. And similarly, the cost of online banking was reduced to zero. Therefore, this has benefited everyone, including PWDs, because they were allowed to open an account without visiting branch through using their Android or other mobile. Similarly, the cost of transfer of fund was reduced to zero. Therefore, this has benefited them to use their banking services for meeting their financial needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen. Thank you so much. Let's see if there is any last question or comment in the chat before we wrap up this discussion. That if it was up to me, we could go on and on, as I think there is much more to learn from everyone in the call today. But we have been really active in the past 90 minutes. I'll still wait 1 more minute to see if we have any last question, maybe from the participants. And while we wait for any potential last question or comment, I know the organizing team has prepared a quick polling for all of you to answer before we wrap up. So Emilia, would you like to run the poll, see whether it works? Thank you, Emilia. Great. So the question that I hope you all see appearing on your screen is, would you be interested if AFI did more on this topic? I think here the report presented by Robin already gives a lot of very good information and guidance on the topic, and we heard from wonderful interventions from our speakers today. And the team would be interested to know whether you think this topic can be pushed further in line with AFI services and activities. So far, from what I can see, it's 100% of yes answer, which is wonderful. And we do have a second question. Let's see if it can appear following the first one, building on the first one. The second question would be, if yes, and it was 100% yes so far, would you yourself be keen on participating in peer learning discussions with AFI members on this topic? Simple yes or no. Wonderful. I see the blue line moving fast. We do have quite a good yes answer. So I think Robin and Vidya, you will have much more work coming your way on this topic, and I'm really happy to hear. And a few percentage of no for this specific question, but I still think it's a very impressive majority answering yes on the 2 questions. So thanks a lot for that. Maybe as we only have 10 minutes left for the program and I don't see any last questions in the chat, I will wrap up on my end. So in very few words, right? We heard from the special report on the importance of having clear definition, understanding on the context of the barriers for financial inclusion for persons with disabilities, the different impact and response of COVID-19 that we have heard in the discussion just now, global outlook on policies and initiatives, and the report also displays specific country cases, and we heard more from Ghana, Kenya, and Pakistan today. So from the recommended actions in the report, I think we really heard from all of you in the discussion right now. So the importance of adaptive financial technologies, we heard a lot on it. This is very important. Second point was on the integration in national plans, national financial inclusion strategies. I think here we can even go a step further in any type of national strategies. It could be education as well, on the importance to integrate this target group at a global dimension. We heard a lot on the importance of collecting specific data on this target group, the importance, but also the challenges here. So having tailored solution for the very diverse subsegment of the target group doesn't make the task easy, yet it makes it very important, and to raise not only awareness and literacy for the demand side, but also the supply side and all the actors in the sector. So on this note, I'd just like to see whether Nasreen, Evans, and Clarence, do you have a last word, maybe in 1 minute each, to conclude this session? Any last recommendation or even any question for your peer speakers that you'd like to ask before we conclude? Thank you so much.
Maybe I could go first. Thank you, Solita. Thank you, AFI team, for giving us this opportunity. I think I would say that the issue of PWDs and financial inclusion are really intertwined. And I would even go ahead and say, whereas we are looking for special coverage for PWDs, I think also let's give the PWDs a chance to be able to bring themselves onto the table as ordinary humans, ordinary citizens of this world, so that they can be able to be incorporated within without a more of a specialized kind of segmentation. Because one of the things we've observed, and I mentioned earlier on, is the issue of discrimination and segmentation. So I think it's good just to ensure that we are giving everybody equal opportunities, and they do deserve equal opportunities as well in the issue of bringing them upon the financial inclusion initiatives. Thank you, and thank you very much for this participation.
Thank you so much, Evans. It was a real pleasure having you in this webinar.
Yeah, thank you for the privilege to be part of this webinar to share a few thoughts on what Ghana is doing to advance the financial inclusion of PWDs. Economic inclusion and financial inclusion are inextricably linked. If you don't have access to financial resource and financial service, it tends to exacerbate your economic condition. Addressing the financial inclusion needs of PWDs also leads to us tackling the economic exclusion conditions of the PWDs. We can only do that through collaboration. It is therefore important that lead institutions like central banks will have to identify key stakeholders in the space. Here I mean the financial service providers, the PWDs association, the fintech ecosystem, the government, as well as the development partners, to be able to fashion our strategies to deal with the constraints that limit effective participation of PWDs in the financial service industry. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Clarence. And thanks again very much for your active participation and insightful experience. And last but not least, let me invite Nasreen for your few concluding words. Thank you, Nasreen.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Financial inclusion of PWDs is shared responsibility of government, financial institutions, and most important, regulator. Everyone has unique role, and we should ensure that everyone should play their role effectively. Government main role is to create policies and laws that prohibit discrimination and provide equal opportunity to everyone, including PWDs. Role of regulator is very important. Their main role is to create enabling environment for PWDs. They should set policies and accessibility standards for financial institutions. They should make policy intervention when required, when they feel that things are not going well for PWDs. The most important thing, uh, while setting accessibility standards, regulators should ensure that the financial institutions are following these standards. They should conduct inspection and audit of financial institutions so that they meet the requirement of the regulators. Regarding financial institutions, their responsibility is very high. They should ensure that all products are accessible to PWDs. They should ensure that PWDs are treated fairly. They are not exploited. Their financial informations are protected, and they are treated fairly at par with other persons. While ensuring fairness with the PWDs, they should ensure that all terms and conditions and price charges related to product used by and or directed for PWDs are clearly made clear to the PWDs. Their clear consent should be obtained, and it should be ensured that the product meet their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nasrin. This very last point is extremely important, and I can't thank you enough, Nasrin, Clarence, and Evans, for your time and your very, very insightful contribution to this webinar.
Our exciting announcement is that our report on financial inclusion for persons with disabilities is officially live on our AFI website. So please feel free to scan the QR code. You can go and access this report via the link. The link is also shared in the chat. So please do have a read of this report and let us know what you think. We'd be very interested to hear your thoughts. So this report is published now, so go do have a look and have a read and let us know what you think. And with that, we would like to conclude this session. Thank you so much for joining this event and have a pleasant day ahead.